Hello and welcome to today's episode of Platinum Talks Wealth. Emmy Nominated journalist Jennifer Rogers Markwell changed gears in her television career when she realized the need to help women make sense of investing. She regularly hosts educational workshops to empower women and others to take charge of their financial future. Now, join your host, Platinum Wealth Management President Jennifer Rogers Markwell, as she leads us into the world of money memories, money infidelities, and how these can mold our relationship with our personal finances as adults. Let's dive into today's episode.
For joining us on the Platinum Talks Wealth podcast. And I'm joined by Michelle Rios, podcaster and entrepreneur. Michelle, thank you so much for making time with us today.
Oh, Jennifer, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited about this conversation.
So tell us about who you are and why you do what you do.
Well, I am a podcaster, an entrepreneur, and I've spent over 25 years in the corporate arena and communications, and I'm also a soon-to-be author. So I do what I do because I actually love really finding ways to draw from my experiences to help inspire others to live their most extraordinary life, which is the name of my podcast. And the idea behind it is really about how we all can step into our most authentic sense of self to really find life in a new way. Now, I spent a lot of time, as I'm sure many of your listeners have, wearing a lot of hats, trying to show up for others the way I thought they needed me to show up for them. And what I found is that I was exhausted. I had a real lack of sense of self. And when I stepped back and really stepped into my deepest sense of authenticity, and I showed up as the Michelle I am at the core of my being in all of my walks of life, life started to really meet me in all of those places. And what becomes the extraordinary is when you are your most authentic, when you show up, the core of your being, 100%, magic starts to happen. And it is extraordinary. When you have the courage to be your most authentic self, because it takes courage to do that, you find that, the universe really just sort of opens up and is your oyster. And so that's really where I want people to tune in, to recognize they have so much within their power to navigate and speak into existence the world and the life that they want to experience.
That goes hand in hand with, again, one of your episodes you were talking about communication, but specifically about like the words that you're using to really cultivate what's happening in your frequency, in your world, in your, universe. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I just posted a video on my Instagram this morning and on Facebook, and I'll reference it because it's very illustrative of this point. A scientist actually took water, plain water, and put several different, the same amount of water in several different petri dishes and then froze them. But before he put them away in the freezer, he put labels on each of them. One was named love, gratitude, optimism, hope. And then others were hatred, disgust, frustration, and then froze them and took them out. And Jennifer, it's incredible. The actual molecules and the crystals that were formed when you look at them under a microscope were so different based on the energy that was associated and labeled to them. And beautiful structures around love and gratitude and hope. Intricate, different ice crystals were formed, versus the ones that had the energy of frustration and negativity that looked, quite frankly, angry. Like they looked sad and depressed. I mean, they weren't even fully formed crystals. And if you can think about water showing up that way based on what we associate it with, think about your own life. That really struck me on why we need to be so diligent and intentional about the words we use. And it was, I got a phone call from a friend, and this friend, I hadn't talked to them in a while. And so I said, so how are you? How are you doing? And the first thing they said was, well, life's okay. Nothing really good ever happens. It's kind of boring right now. And it struck me. It actually kind of reminded me that I had spoke to this person maybe 3 months earlier, and it was almost word for word the same thing they said to me 3 months ago. And then it made me think, wow, this person always kind of shows up with this low energy, no matter what we do. And it just reminded me the importance of being conscientious about your words. So when they said, so how about you, Michelle? What's going on with you? I said, I'm fantastic. Like things are good. I'm really excited about life. Didn't mean that everything was fabulous in every moment, but it was an intention that I wanted to put out there that I am excited about my life, even the good, the bad, the ugly. I was joking, but true story. I had spilled coffee all over myself right before getting on this call. And I have two giant Great Pyrenees that love to howl in sync to the ambulance or the police car that's going through the neighborhood. And I was like a little frustrated with them. They wouldn't settle down and had gotten a really stressful email from a client earlier. So there were a lot of things brewing, and that was just in the moment. That was in the 5 minutes before I had gotten on that call. And yet I had the wherewithal to say, hey, I'm going to be really intentional and change the vibration of this conversation. By the end of the call, this person we were talking to had excitement in their voice. We started to really change the physiology of the call and the dynamic. And you can do that with the words, what you say to yourself, the music that you put around your life. Again, I feel everything everyone else feels: grief, anger, frustration, sadness. I allow myself to feel it. But I always say something might rattle me, but it's not going to unravel me. I don't
Oh,
get
that's
stuck
good.
there. I don't get stuck there. I move through it. Might take me a couple days, but I'm going to move through it. Allow yourself to feel the feelings and move on. But the words you use have great power over your life. So be good to yourself. I've gotten past the part of my life where I stood in the mirror and pointed out all the things that were wrong with me. I'm way past that part. I'm at a part where I am so grateful that I am upright, vertical, that I still have hair, that I have a good smile, that, I can feel good in my own skin. I know how to nourish my body in a way that makes it function well. Don't always make the right choices because I love food. But generally speaking, I look at and I say words of affirmation. Thank you for showing up today, Michelle. Let's go have a great day. Let's go have some fun. Let's go see what we can conjure up today. And I'm telling you, speaking the small blessings over your life can just change the trajectory of so much. And imagine what it can do for your kids. I have a 16-year-old that can be sultry just like everybody else and kind of like, a little moody and all of these things. And still comes to me every moment before he walks out the door. Bye, Mom. Gives me the hug. So I can say, I love you. Have a great day. I'll be thinking of you. I'm rooting for you, kid. Even though he's always sort of like protests, like, oh, whatever, he never fails to come and find me. Even if I'm not right there, he'll come and find me before he leaves our house because I'll speak a blessing over him. I love you. Have a great day. I'll be thinking of you. Be safe. Can't wait to see you later. Changes everything.
Love that. Love that. That also goes into kind of hand in hand with the relationship with money, quite frankly, right? How you're speaking into it, what words you're using, what that energy kind of exchange looks like as well, which kind of goes hand in hand with our money memories conversation. What's a money memory that you had as a child or a young person that really kind of molded your relationship to money as an adult?
Yeah, this is a good one. Because I did my money memories are actually kind of stark. My parents were young when they had me. Money was very tight. I just remember a lot of early on in my childhood arguments around money because there wasn't a lot of it and it was stressful. And so my association with money very early was it's chaotic, it's stressful, it's hard to find. It's not a topic I want to be around or hear about because I didn't hear anyone talking happily about it. And And then I always talked about like, I heard people talking about what can we pay now? What do we have to put off paying later? So it just felt stressful. That was my earliest memory, and a lot of frugality. Like, we're going to have to forgo this and we can't do that. So there was a lot of negativity around the connotation of what money was for me. I was very cognizant early on that we didn't have a lot and that was a problem. And so I didn't become very comfortable with money as a young person. I was afraid of it, to be honest.
When was your pivotal point of when you kind of changed that mindset that you had with money?
It's interesting because even when I was out of my own and I was starting to earn money and after college and working in the corporate world and climbing the ladder, and I had significantly more than I had ever had, I still had a poverty mindset. So I squirreled money away. I was very frugal. In one way, it created some good habits because I didn't spend what I didn't have. So that was good. I wasn't getting into debt as a 20-something. And I paid off my credit card every month diligently. Diligently. That was the two things my mother always said to me: pay off your credit card. Don't spend more than what you have. And I did. I lived that way throughout my 20s. But I was not good about investing. Somehow in my head, it was something I would do later when I had more. And so I kind of got a later start. And it wasn't the pivotal moment for me was actually meeting my financial advisor after my son was born and actually having a plan in place. And when we got the plan in place, then it sort of was like, oh, wow, we're doing so much better than we realized. And we have flexibility we didn't even know we had. But on the flip side, so I spent nearly 40 years of my life just being cautious around money because I was really worried that if I got it, I wanted to make sure I held on to it, and I didn't want to spend more than I had. So we brought in more, we spent less than we had, we lived below our means. That was sort of the mindset I had. So I hadn't really figured out how to have fun until I had a plan in place. And when that plan was finally put in place, I literally had my advisor, who's a good friend, say, Michelle, take the trip. Go on a real vacation you can afford to. And it was life-changing because it was an important value of mine that I was not allowing myself to have because I was worried that we might not, like maybe we need to have a bigger house with a picket white fence and a cert in the bank before we should start doing these things that were recreational in my mind. And what I didn't realize is I could afford the house and the picket white fence, despite the fact that I live in a really expensive part of the country that I just didn't know how to do it effectively yet. I had to learn. And I could go on the vacation. And in fact, the vacation for me was this moment of creativity. So we started to really think about how do we use the money that we're making to make sure we're planning for the future. We're thinking about college for our son. We're thinking about one day being able to retire and having money set aside for when we are no longer working in the current capacities that we are in, but also finding opportunities we're working hard for to enjoy our lives and to create freedom. Ultimately, that's what I was craving, and I was denying myself that out of fear because I didn't really know how to manage my money effectively. I was saving it, so that was good. I wasn't spending more than I had, but I wasn't growing it or planning with it in a way that created that stability for me. And it wasn't until I sat down, and gosh, that was like 16 years ago. I sat down and said, oh my gosh, we're in so much better shape than I realized, and I can breathe.
And I find that as a common denominator across a lot of folks, in general, right? You think that, wow, I don't know what this looks like. And many folks will have the immediate kind of response to, I don't want to look at it because I'm not sure what this looks like. So bury your head in the sand, not deal with it. When really, like, let's crunch some numbers, whether you're doing yourself or you're working with a financial advisor, really seeing what does that map look like for you? How does it need to evolve to make sure that you're reaching your goals? What does that truly look like? And I feel like that in itself, even when things need to be evolved or changed a little bit, gives such a peace of mind, just knowing at that moment.
Yeah. Even if so it was interesting being put in the driver's seat of your money because you actually understand you have somebody working with you to say, look, you need this amount to be able to really feel and be in a place to retire at your retirement age. If you want to retire earlier, here's what the numbers need to look like. And I was like, oh, well, that changes the conversation. We might be able to do something different than just stay steady Eddie in a certain career. We might have flexibility to try new things. And that just really motivated us to be like, okay, well, let's see what we can to really double down in earning now in the next few years in order to create more flexibility about when and if we might change things up and not necessarily stay stuck. I say that loosely. I didn't feel stuck, but stay wedded to a certain career or a certain job path. And now, we are in this place because of this conversation we started 16 years ago where we can say, hey, let's try some new things. Do you want to try a different career path for a bit? Let's see. Let's just see what's possible. And we're in a spot to do that. If we had not put that plan in place, I would never feel comfortable to step out and do what I'm doing now. Honest to God truth.
That's awesome. And I do see that, when we're talking with clients and doing financial plans, there's almost that just breath of sigh of relief in that moment of like, okay, I can evolve this, I can change gears, but there's that roadmap in place behind the scenes. And one thing that I also want to touch on too, I think a lot of folks initially have that mentality. Well, I don't have millions and millions of dollars. I only have X, whatever X is. And they think, well, I don't have enough money to figure out if I have a financial plan. You do. Just make sure that you're finding the appropriate financial advisor, right, who wants to work with you and you want to work with, and you have that good communication style to work with that person and vice versa, and cultivate that relationship, because those relationships, as you said, are long-term. They're long-term. They evolve to friendships. You are a part of, that person's world and their family in essence, where you're going to funerals, you're helping grandkids, new kids are coming in, you're talking through strategies for that whole family dynamic. And I feel like there's no better time to start than now. No matter where your path is or where you're at, have that conversation and take that responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we certainly didn't have millions. And when we started off 16 years ago, we had, I'd probably say an eighth of what we have now to work with. But it was actually learning a lot of things. Like we both were under the mindset if we left our corporate environment that the 401k world would dry up and we wouldn't have the same places to put money away. And then, we learned about the fact that, hey, there's something called the SEP that, my husband is an entrepreneur and he runs his own business and he started setting up his own equivalent to the 401k environment in this entrepreneurial world. I didn't even know what a SEP was. So even just the language and the literacy that came from sitting down with somebody who's knowledgeable changed the trajectory of our careers, because he was like, well, shoot, why not go start this company? There's still some opportunities to put money away for retirement in ways we didn't recognize were possible. We'll just do it in a different way in a different type of account, but it's essentially the same. Things
And you
like
mentioned
that.
Yeah. And you had mentioned your son, right? So maybe this is an education or financial literacy that you had growing up, but your son is seeing this as a role model to him financially, like what's going on in your world. How are you helping kind of him evolve and learn as he's growing as well?
I think the biggest thing is I grew up under a cloud of fear around money. It just wasn't comfortable. We didn't have a lot. So just the whole thing made me nervous. And my sister, who's 4 years younger, same thing. We used to talk about, we had a knot in our stomach having money talks with our parents because we saw that it brought them so much anxiety. And I'm so grateful for is to be at a place where I said, look, we're going to not do everything perfectly, right? Each generation tries to do better than the one before in different ways. One of the big ones for me was around money. I was not going to have the same level of anxiety and fear around money that my family had when I was growing up, so that my son feels less detached around it, because I wanted him to feel comfortable. I wanted him to recognize it didn't have to be scary. And he doesn't have any of those connotations around money. For him, it's a resource. There's no emotional feeling of good or bad. It's a resource. For me, it was scary and I was intimidated by it. And I had to treat it, in a way I treated it really well because I was careful with it. But I could have grown it more if I was more bold. My son is growing up with the sense of, hey, you can't just put money under your pillow and hope for things to go well. We got to put it in places where it will grow, and you need to plan. And he gets that, you got to spend money to make money, which is nothing I ever learned. He's like, Mom, you can't just start a business and not expect to have to spend money to make money. I'm like, whose kid are you? I love this. I love that that's how he feels, and he gets that, and he does not have fear. And he's also, I think like a lot of kids, still living at home, and he's, still in high school. He also doesn't spend as much because he's got mom and dad spending the money. Right. But it's, in a way I kind of laugh, because he'll say things like, I got it, Mom. We'll go to the grocery store to get ice cream or something. Last night we ran out to get, just this one thing. He wanted ice cream. He's like, I got it, and I was like, good. Yeah, you got it. Because, the tabs are growing over here. But there are other times where, he's like, I really need to get these cleats for soccer, and this is what I need now. What have you? And I was like, he's like, I can get it, Mom, don't worry. And I was like, no, that's okay. That's money that you need to watch, that you have for you. And in case of emergencies, I will get this as part of the clothing, shelter, and other things that we're providing you with. It's fine. But for him to really feel freedom around money, and he gets it. He's not a spendthrift kid. He's growing up in an affluent environment. There are kids, I think a lot of America, there's this big disparity. You either are growing up in some sort of suburban environment where there's a lot of affluence, and it's sort of like, well, how is that impacting our children? Or unfortunately, you see a lot that have really little. And that, frankly, is more reminiscent of how I grew up. My son is now in this environment where he has two working parents that have had children later in life. So he's growing up in a more affluent environment, but he does have a reverence for it. That it's not, he'll say things like, we don't really need that, do we? Which always cracks me up. Do we really need that? We don't really need that.
Wow.
We both work a lot. So our tendency is do you guys want to go grab something for dinner? He's like, we don't need to do that. We have food in the refrigerator, which is so nice to hear and remind us, because we're the ones who are like, great, do you want to help us cook that food? But I love that about him. I think he has a healthy detachment from money. He knows what it's for, but it's not there's no real emotional feeling around it. It's a resource.
Well, good job, Mama, because you instilled that in him. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. I'm excited to see what happens, because I know he gets it. My husband and I grew up in families where, they weren't going to be able to pay for college the way we could for him. And I always joke, though, I said, we had skin in the game. Makes a big difference. And I said, we can pay for your college entirely. We've made these plans. But I need to know you have skin in the game. So maybe we won't pay for it entirely. Not because we can't, but because I want you to have skin in the game for your own benefit. And I said, that is such a good thing. It's good to want things. It's a healthy ambition that goes with having wants. Everybody should have some wants. It gives you something to get up and go pursue. So we haven't, we could, but he doesn't have everything he wants, and that's okay. I don't have everything I want in my life, and it's not the material things, it's the experiences now for me, right? And so I do have this, no matter what I end up doing in terms of money streams, there's this idea of what I want to experience, what I want to be able to do, and the impact I want to have. And so it motivates me to get up and think about, how's my money going to be used to help me get there strategically. I think everybody should have that, instead of being I can't because I don't have enough. I started off with nothing. I came to Washington, D.C. at 21 years old, no car. I had a rented U-Haul with bedroom furniture from my childhood, and I had $300 from high school, from college graduation. That's it. I knew nobody. I didn't have any relationships here with people or with relatives. I knew no one. I started over with $300 at 21, and I've built a life here. I've been here a long time, but it can be done. It can be done.
That's awesome. So one other thing we like to talk through too is financial infidelities. So we've heard of them. We've sometimes experienced them. What's a financial infidelity story that you're open to sharing?
Well, this is one that my husband and I go back to because it was part of early on in our relationship. So we come from different backgrounds. My husband is from Peru originally, and he came here at 19. And, so he's an immigrant, and I'm from the small town. And my small town experience with my parents growing up the way we did was be frugal, be independent, don't carry any debt. I had this certain mentality around money. My husband, on the other hand, was much more comfortable with credit than I was. And I would say a little too comfortable with credit. And so when we actually sat down early in our marriage just to talk about merging accounts early on, I didn't realize all of the credit that he owed. He had debts. I didn't know he had credit card debt. He had college tuition debt. He had a car loan that was, far exceeded anything I would expect somebody who was in their 20s to be able to afford. I remember thinking, what the what? And it didn't occur to him that I needed to know this before we got married, because for him, it was his stuff. It wasn't like he was expecting me to pay for it. So in his mind, it was his. Whereas I had been like, here's how much is in my bank account. Here's how much is in the money market. Here's how much is in savings. This is how much I still owe my student loan. It should be done in 2 years. I had created a nest egg, and I wanted to go into this marriage with like this clean balance sheet. I am a good marriage material asset for you. And he was like, great, good job. But he wasn't mutually open at that point. He was like, well, it's not yours to worry about. Like, I'm happy for you, like that you have this clean, but like I had to take out more loans than you. And I came from another country. My whole family started over. I bought a nice car because I was working really hard. And my thought was, but you're in your 20s. Like, we haven't even begun to pay our debts of like society and life. Like, who has that kind of car in their 20s? Like, that can't afford to pay for it outright? Like, nobody. So it was interesting. Before we got married, he did sell the car, but it was embarrassing and humiliating and hurtful and angry. All the emotions were had, sadly, in front of the third party who had access to our collective background, because he pulled all of our credit history and sat down and showed it to both of us. It was the first time I was learning about it. And I felt so hurt that he hadn't opened up, and I felt scared because it felt like a lot that I didn't know. And how were we going to handle this? And in his mind, it was, I don't know why you're worried about it. It's my stuff and I will take care of it. And he did. And he has. But once we merged together in marriage, it felt like, well, it's mine too now. Like, we're both paying for these things. So that was probably the first time. And it was the only time that we hadn't had an open conversation. After that, I think probably because he was tired of hearing me say, like, not putting it on the table is the equivalent of lying. Like, you just admitted the whole thing. Like, I never even knew. And he was like, and we were young, he was in his 20s, and that we had to be more open. And I needed to be more trusting that he did have a handle on it. And he did. But it did change the trajectory of like, we will be talking about money. Like, we did balance checkbooks back then, like, in a time when people really used checks and had checkbooks. We used to sit down and do our monthly, expenses and balance the checkbook together. And I made him do it with me. It was something I had already been doing. He hadn't really been doing it as much. And so when we got together to sit down, I was like, we will do this together every month. And then eventually, he just sort of took over the finances when our son was born, and I was balancing a lot more of motherhood responsibilities along with my career. And he's become a real money master.
Well, thank you for being so open and raw and vulnerable and sharing that. I feel like, the couple's communication, no matter what type of relationship you're in, is so, so important because, like you had said, in his mindset, he thought he was doing everything fine. That was his. And in your mindset, you're like, oh, hey, we're merging together and this becomes ours at that point. But you ended up, making it work by communicating. What would you share with other, couples that maybe aren't utilizing communication to the level that they should? Just because, your story, I've heard, and it's challenging, and you want both people to work together the best that they can, but sometimes there's that divide there.
Yeah. I think one of the lessons I had to learn in that story was don't let fear dominate the communication, because you end up shutting the other person out and shaming them. And I
Mhm.
did that. I did that for a while, really much to my own regret, because it made him shut down to me for a time. And so it actually hurt me. And so I've learned in time to really modulate. Money is a resource. My money history and my story still at that point was money was something to be afraid of. If we owe it, oh my God, that's awful. And I had this whole emotional response to that situation that was probably exaggerated. It felt monumental to me, but I can tell you, we worked through it. We got through it. It was fine. It felt scary. But again, that was based on my history. For him, he didn't have that same sort of hit. For him, money was also a resource in order to start life over. And it was a necessity in his mind. And so he didn't have the fear. In fact, he was much more bold. And I think the two of us coming together in the middle for him to realize, well, it's impacting the emotional, um, impacting somebody else that he loved emotionally in a way that was negative. And for me to realize, well, maybe it's okay to be a little bit more bold as long as we're open about it, brought us both to a more middle ground for each of us to grow around our money stories. And frankly, to create new ones, because that's when we started sitting down and saying, okay, this is what we're both bringing in. Where do we want to go? And so we would just make up these goals that didn't necessarily feel attainable. They were just felt like big, giant, scary, fun, imaginative. Like, wouldn't it be great if this is what we're at now, but then we were making this in like a year? And then we would play with it. And I'm telling you, write down your money goals. So important. I find this to be a really fun tool. My husband started this years and years ago. We come up with, you go online and find them. These are checks, they're blank checks. We write ourselves checks and put it on the wall. So this is my latest check. Feels probably like a lot for a lot of people, but I wrote myself a check for $10 million and I post-dated it. It's for 2 years out. So check in with me, Jennifer, in 2 years. But it's fun. We play with it. We hit all of our financial goals when we were in our 30s for that era of time and well into our 40s by writing them down and putting them. We had them in a spot in our bedroom where we both had to see them every day, and we worked toward them together. We blew those out
Oh,
of the water. We
I
blew them
love
out of the
that.
water because we wrote them down.
Yeah. And you did it together.
And we did it together. There was a lot of power in that. And we came up with interesting ideas that we wouldn't have individually had if we A, not had the conversation, B, not written it down, and C, not done it together.
Well, as we wrap things up, one thing I like to ask is how do you utilize, and you've already shared many of this, but how do you utilize money in your household differently? What are tips or tricks that you're open to sharing?
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. We're still good savers. So quarterly, because my husband owns his own business, so we pay quarterly taxes. But quarterly, we also put money away. We write a check every quarter. We also own a rental property that was our home before the home we got into now. We pay an extra payment on that every year. And the other piece of this is a good portion of our disposable income goes specifically for travel. And we go typically 2 to 3 times a year somewhere overseas. great planning goes into this. So earlier in spring break, we were on a trip in the Caribbean. We'll be going to Europe this summer. And then we'll be going to North Africa around Thanksgiving. And there's a great deal of family planning that goes into this. We still look for deals. We definitely look for deals. Traveling last minute is not, it's very expensive. So I try not to do that. We try to plan ahead, look for deals, but we know there's a certain amount of our annual income is going to go to that because it is an important value of our family to travel, experience new cultures, be exposed to new languages and other food, learn the geography, take in those experiences to inspire us to come back and be more creative and productive in our everyday.
I love that. I love that so much. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for making time to chat today. And I definitely will be checking in with you in 2 years on your check.
Absolutely. Thank you for the accountability.
My pleasure. And hopefully you will join us on our next Platinum Talks Wealth podcast.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, Platinum Talks Wealth, please subscribe and share. For more information about Jennifer Rogers Markwell or Platinum Wealth Management, please visit www.platinumwealth.net. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member of FINRA and SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and their companies are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Platinum Wealth Management.